It's recording, so yeah. Yeah, we're not going to do it. We're good. Okay, so you have to get set computer after it starts. You guys are here. The stuff, it's the fact. That's fine for you. So just leave that where it is. And you can still use it. There's a clock there that's good. You need a
our GSA seminar of the year. It's good to see a really nice turnout. Excited to have everybody. So today for our speaker we have Dr. Steve Sammons from Auburn University. Sammons' work focused on a variety of applied freshwater issues. But today he'll be talking about one of the coolest fish that there is, and one of the coolest sport fish, no doubt, which is the shoal bass. This endemic to North Georgia, Alabama, and North Florida. Yeah. So with that, I'll give it away to Dr. Sammons, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. And yes, what a crowd! What a crowd! All right, so yes, today I'm going to be talking about some of the work we have done on shoal bass in the ACF Basin. I've titled this talk basically Climbing the Learning Curve and Outrunning the Extinction Curve. So one of the things when you're going to go try to keep a fish from going extinct, or at least becoming extremely imperiled, it generally helps if you know something about the animal. And that's the situation we kind of find ourselves here with shoal bass and a lot of these river bass, like the one that you have locally, where we never really knew much about the fish, and the fish is not doing all that well in places. So the first thing to do, I think, would be to meet shoal bass. Shoal bass are endemic to the Apalachicola watershed. That is the Chattahoochee River, the Flint River that form the Apalachicola River. They're a fluvial specialist. That fancy word meaning they only live in rivers. They don't withstand impoundment. When you put a dam up, they disappear. They prefer rocky habitat with strong flow. And what that means in this part of the world is that they're very common around the fall line. They're a fall line specialist, if you will. The fall line, you probably know, is that area of transition from the Piedmont down to the coastal plain. It's an area where the rivers tend to have higher gradients. They tend to have a lot of exposed rock, and so they're kind of perfect for this animal. Shoal bass provide a unique sport fishery because not only do they look really cool, not only do they live in really neat places, they get really big. The world record shoal bass is just under 9 pounds. The state record in Georgia is just over 8 pounds. But that doesn't really truly tell the story. This fish routinely reaches 5, 5.5, even 6 pounds. And so this is something that obviously garners a lot of attention by the anglers. So what I thought I would do is to go back to the very beginning, as they say, as to what all started this crazy shoal bass train that we've been on now for 12 years. Back in the early 2000s, we started being interested in looking, reassessing the status of shoal bass in Alabama in these 4 creeks here that are all right near the campus, as you can see, and historically had shoal bass in them. But no one really ever samples these creeks for much of anything, and certainly not for shoal bass. So they decided it might be good to get some idea of what's going on there. And what we found wasn't the most happy news you could imagine. So Hullawackee Creek is the one that's actually closest to the Auburn campus. It's the only one that we had any kind of historical data for. And it wasn't something nice like a time series of catch per unit efforts or anything like that. Nothing nearly that fancy. What we did have was some guy in the late 60s do a master's thesis on this creek. And he didn't provide catch rates or anything like that, but he was doing an assessment, and he was able to catch roughly equal numbers of shoal bass and spotted bass in order to do his project. And then 40 years went by without anyone noticing. And we're like, well, gee, I wonder what's it's like there now. And what it's like there now is it's completely dominated by this spotted bass form that is introduced. It's not native. So that wasn't very good news. What about the other creeks? Well, the other creeks look pretty much the same. You know, you have native largemouth bass in yellow there, and the introduced by the bass in blue, and the red is the shoal bass. You can see that the other two of the other creeks look just like Halawaki Creek. We only had one population in Little Uchi Creek, where it was above a barrier that was really hard for fish to get around. And lo and behold, there's almost no exotic fish, and you have mostly native fish. So, this was kind of a sobering wake-up call. To make matters worse, we also happen to preside over the collapse of the one shoal bass population that we had following a rather large and extended drought. The population dropped 80% and never really seemed to recover. And so our concept of shoal bass kind of changed literally overnight. And it went from being a fish that we just considered to be a nice component of the fishery to something that desperately needed to be protected. And actually, Alabama put a harvest moratorium on the fish, which still remains to this day. You're not allowed to harvest this fish from Alabama waters, although that is somewhat like closing the barn door after the horse and the entire herd has galloped out, because we really don't have any left anyway. This is not a unique issue. There are other parts of the country, mostly in the southeast, where you have these unique forms of fish. Over here you have two different forms of smallmouth bass, but most of the action is really right here where we live. You have all these different overlapping native forms of bass, including right where we are now with the Bartram's bass that's being worked on here. And of course you have the Guadalupe bass over here. And so what happened was, a lot of us kind of started talking to each other and came together and decided that we needed to go in a different route and combine our forces to create something called the Native Black Bass Initiative, which is a keystone initiative under the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They actually came to us and they wanted to have some kind of an initiative in the southeast. Most of NIFWIC has worked out in the west on trout. And they wanted a presence in the southeast, and they thought this would be a good way to do it. And so this kind of represents a paradigm shift, if you will. Up until the late 2000s, really when we think of bass, we think of management. We think of length limits. We think of stocking. We think of going out and assessing them on an annual basis to figure out their population structure. What we don't think of them as is conservation species. We don't think of them as protecting habitat for the species. We don't think of them as worrying about whether or not they're going to vanish. So this is quite a change in how we think. Now I'm going to show you this again. This won't be the last time you see this talk. The question that I have asked myself for a while is, how can a sport fish almost go extinct from a major river system, which is the Chattahoochee, without anyone noticing? I mean, this is a bass, okay? Well, there has been a bias against black bass in the conservation community, and when I say that, I don't mean that they don't like them, although some don't, but it's mostly that they say they're bass. They can live everywhere. They're not a fish that we have to worry about, you know, so they've ignored them. And then, as a corollary to that, is what I'm calling species borrowing. This is a term that actually comes from bioenergetics work, pioneered by John Ney at Virginia Tech a million years ago when I was a student there. Species borrowing is that, well, this species is closely related to it. We know something about this species, therefore it applies to all species that are closely related. That's a bad idea in bioenergetics modeling. Actually, Dr. Ney referred that as giving a baby a handgun. You don't know what's going to happen, but it's probably not going to be good. It's the same thing for here. Because guess what? The more I study them, the more I can tell you bass ain't just bass. It's not bass. So, I guess I should also say, before I get going on our work, what really prompted an issue here is at the same time we were looking at these streams in Alabama and going, oh my God, there's no shoal bass left in the state, and they're all full of these non-native spotted bass. The Flint River in Georgia had its first occasion of a spotted bass capture. And this was the mainstay of shoal bass. To say the least, those two events happening at the same time precipitated quite a panic. And sometimes panic is good for us researchers because it means we have money to go out and do some really cool stuff. So one of the things we did was go put some radios in these fish. Not just shoal bass, but the other ones too. So this was a really cool, unique opportunity to do simultaneous radio tracking of 3 congeners. Really neat. I always wanted to do it. I highly recommend it. It's so cool to be able to see this all happening at the same time and how these fish are acting in the same environment. So this is just the results of some of the work. You can clearly see here we got flow on this side. Largemouth bass are doing what you would think largemouth bass are doing. Basically hiding away from the current and being wimps. They also like the deeper water, which is what we would expect. Shoal bass are like the exact opposite. Bring on the flow, and we're a little bit shallower because that's where the flow is. Now the non-native fish are kind of like a hybrid between the two. Just like any good generalist will do, it kind of does a little bit of everything. So it kind of likes a little bit flow, not as much maybe, and it likes the deeper water kind of like a largemouth. When you get the cover associations, you see something really interesting. Shoal bass really stick out here. So this is distance to boulder substrate. They're way closer to boulder than either of the other two. This is different distance to large woody debris, basically trees in the water. They aren't too fond of them compared to the other two. And this is the distance to the bank, which I find so fascinating. This is the way this fish lives and breathes, because we see this over and over again. They aren't the fish to sit and hang underneath the little undercut banks and wait for some poor little lost darter to come by. No, they're out in the thick of it. They're in the middle of the river. They're behind a small little current break somewhere right out in the middle of the flow saying, bring it on, bring it on. So they're very different. And the spotted bass kind of are, intermediate between the two. But what really caught our attention in this project was what the shoal bass did in the springtime. So this is a bass. We started this study, and this was a nice little about 5-mile stretch of river right there that was accessible by boat. It had some nice shoals. It had some deep pools. It had some nice runs. It had all 3 species of bass in it. Perfect place to do an annual telemetry study. So we put the tags in there in late fall, and everything went fine. Until March. And we had this one weird largemouth go up to the base of some big shoal up there. But what really happened was, this first week of March, the graduate student came back and said, all the shoal bass are gone. And I was like, what? All the shoal bass are gone? So we started getting in canoes and doing float trips. And lo and behold, most, not all, of the missing shoal bass were down here in this really large shoal complex. So the ungrateful little guys decided to leave where we could easily track them and go right in the middle of one of the hardest places you could possibly find to track them. And so we had to, for the rest of the spring, keep doing these 14, 15-mile float trips on top of the other kind of tracking up here, because the rest of this fish didn't leave, to figure out what was going on there. And you see this guy right here. So we were doing every other week, we would float down this way. There's a state park right around here where we would take out. And so we floated down one week, nothing from there all the way down to the state park. the next week, we actually got up in a plane because there were several of them that we couldn't find. And we did a survey of the whole river, and lo and behold, this fish was there. Now, that fish was not there the week before, but he was there then. So I'm like, well, that's weird. I mean, we could miss him. I mean, what the heck? So the next week, the student goes back, goes back here, and who's there? Him. He's not there anymore. And so the big question to us was, where the hell was that fish all spring? Because he wasn't anywhere in this stretch for a 2-month period, and clearly we caught him coming back from somewhere in a big, big hurry. So, you know, and again, you have to realize that back then, in 2008, this fish was still a bass to us. So we're like, what is going on here? Bass don't do this, right? Along with this, we did a tagging study. Now, you can do tagging studies for lots of reasons. I would love to say that we had some great prescient knowledge that we were going to find something awesome out with this tagging study. The truth is, we were tagging these fish to find out how many people caught them and ate them. So we tagged a bunch of fish with standard anchor tags. They were scattered over a 200-kilometer stretch of river, basically from the farthest north access point to the farthest south access point. And we collected them by shocking with a boat where we could and fishing by canoe where we couldn't. It's tough work, but someone has to do it. Well, of course, when there's 40 miles of the river you can't get a boat in, it might be good to tag a few fish in there just to make sure, right? So, this kind of got us some, by the way, I'm going to say we got great harvest data from this. They harvest the snot out of them. That's why there's now a 15-inch minimum on there. But we found something else out that we really weren't looking for. I'm going to just focus on this one little thing here. This is so unbelievable. There's this little area down here near Fort Valley, Georgia. Very easy to sample. It's coastal plain habitat. Very sandy, sinuous channel. Woody debris out in the main channel, which is what the fish were hanging on. We got 25 fish there in 2 different trips, put anchor tags in them. Half of those fish got recaptured. Only one was caught anywhere near where we tagged it. The next closest one swam 28 kilometers up a tributary stream till it hit a mill dam. And apparently even these fish can't get over mill dams, so it had to sit there. And an angler caught it, called me up. I had to spend 10 minutes convincing him that the river that I had never heard of at that point had to connect to the Flint River because, yes, we tagged it in the Flint River, and they're not walking catfish as far as I knew. But what's amazing is the other 10 were caught a minimum of 70 kilometers upstream of where we tagged the fish. And 3 of them, just to prove that they could all do it, were caught 120 kilometers upstream of where we tagged them. This is crazy talk for bass. This is like, oh my God, these things are sturgeon with a big mouth. I'm like, what is going on here? If you actually look at it, this is the recapture data. So if the fish was recaptured late summer or fall, it mostly did what you would think a bass would do. 80% of them were caught within 10 kilometers of where we tagged them. But in the spring, a whole different ballgame emerges. Only 40% of them are caught within 20 kilometers. Then you have these fish all the way out here, and look at this front. 200 kilometers. Are you freaking kidding me? That fish was tagged at the lowest place that we could tag it and was caught at the highest place it could possibly be caught at. So to say the least, this changed everything about what we thought about shoal bass. Even more cool, there's 2 subpopulations that happen here. Fish that we tagged in the Piedmont and were caught in the Piedmont didn't move all that much and could be either downstream of where we caught them or upstream where we caught them. Fish in the coastal plain, almost none of them were ever recaptured where we caught them, and all of them were captured upstream, and 10 or 12% of those fish were caught more than 100 kilometers upstream. This is crazy. This is This is the kind of big river stuff you would see if you were studying the giant suckers out in the western United States, or sturgeon, like I said, in the Mississippi or Missouri rivers. So where, oh where are they going? Yeah, I was going to say I'm going to have to use the mouse for this, I think. Yes. Okay, so where are they going? They are going to these giant, what I call mega shoal complexes. These guys that have the name on them. They have a name. They have the skull and crossbones. Do not go there. They're bank to bank. They're a mile long. The big shoals. That's where they're going. They pile into these places in incredible densities. And they all spawn in that general area, and then they disperse back out in the streams. Again, this is bass behavior that we've never actually seen before. So to bring this way up to like present, like as in like a week my student is defending this data, in Flat Shoals Creek, which is what you just saw, actually that's not the Flint River, there's this big shoal, and the fish, this is how they use this. This is a tributary to the Chattahoochee, by the way. So this is a map, and the only thing you have to look at is the spread of the points. The points are the locations of the fish. In wintertime, this is the shoal that you just saw on that video right here. So in the wintertime, the fish come down near the top of that shoal, and that's it. They don't ever show up in it. But in the spawning period, a whole different pattern emerges here. This is the spawning shoal. I think there's a few fish in there. To put the numbers on it, we had 40 fish tagged in that thing. 90% of them at one time was in that shoal. Can you imagine? 90% of the fish population is in one 1 mile area. And then, after spawn, going into autumn, they redistribute up to the stream, and you have a few fish that hang here, and most of those were small males. So this fish is showing some really incredible behavior that changes a lot of what we think about. I mean, this is no longer a local situation. If you have fish that are swimming 200 kilometers upstream to go spawn, that means that you have to start looking at things on a watershed context. That something that's happening way up here, let's say Atlanta, could affect things 150 kilometers downstream because it might be wiping out something that they need. Okay. Switching gears a big time, but this is just briefly, how fast do they grow? This is another crazy thing. Now, I know a lot of y'all are still undergraduates or haven't really gotten into this field strongly yet, but let me just say, largemouth bass, when it comes to growth in the southeastern United States, largemouth bass are the king. Undisputed champion of the world until they met shoal bass. And then that shoal bass blow them out of the water. This is craziness. I mean, the shoal bass reaches 16 inches about 3 years earlier than that largemouth does. This never happens either, by the way. I mean, smallmouth bass are wonderful stream fish, but they don't outgrow largemouth bass. So this contributes to why they're such a great fish, or fishery, excuse me. Because if you grow fast, you don't have as much mortality acting upon you, and therefore more of you can reach 4 pounds. That's why when you go fishing in the spring, some of these anglers who know where these spawning shoals are and know how to catch these fish, 30 fish, 40 fish days, half the fish over 3 pounds. Unbelievable. As far as recruitment patterns, I think this is another really cool thing. So this is flow here. This is basically strength of recruitment. If you're above the line, it's good. If you're below the line, it's bad. You can pretty much see largemouth bass are doing what we think largemouth bass would do. In floods, they hate it. Meanwhile, here's the shoal bass. Really? They don't really care, okay? If it's flooding, if it's a drought, they're still going to be able to recruit. This is a classic animal who's a big river fish. The thing that I tell folks all the time, and what I just got done telling you all about, if I took the names off of all this, and I said, here's all these graphs of the movement, of the habitat, of the recruitment patterns and all that. Tell me what fish it is. Bass would be so far down the list you couldn't see it with a microscope. I mean, they'd be talking about salmon, they'd be talking about trout, they'd be talking about sturgeon, sauger, Alabama or American shad, striped bass. You know what I'm saying? This is craziness. This is craziness. So what does it all mean? Well, they're highly mobile species. They move seasonally rather than daily. They form large spawning aggregations, which is a major issue with management. One reason why are they harvested so at such a high rate? Well, because they can be. It's not too hard. After spawning, some of them remain in those shoals, but the rest disperse out through the river. Obviously, shoal habitat appears to be an important nursery area. I wish you had pictures and videos and all of everything you ever see. You know, wouldn't it be cool? But I could tell you that I had one of my graduate students, the first graduate student, was working on shoal bass. He was collecting a bunch of H0 fish to do hatch date distributions with. And this is, again, early on. This is 2008. It would have been the first year he did this. So we were just starting to get a little picture of what this fish was doing, but not much yet. And we went out to one of those big shoals. Actually, it was the top shoal on the Flint River, big flat shoal. And I remember this so distinctly. We go out, I'm waiting out there, the water's like this deep, and there's all these schools of minnows swimming all over the place. And then I got to looking at them, I'm like, those are the weirdest looking minnows I've ever seen. And I look closer, I'm like, OMG, those things are baby shoal bass. Hundreds in schools swimming around. And there's not a minnow in that shoal. Are you kidding me? Could you think of any worse place for a minnow to be than in that shoal right there? The first thing they probably do after the larvae come off the nest is, all right, boys, time to leave, you know, because here comes the hungry hordes of shoal bass. It took him literally 5 minutes to collect 60 fish for his hatch date stuff. So they're very important nursery areas. So what happens if someone builds a housing development on top of one of those babies? The impact is going to be felt way downstream. I can promise you that. There's 2 subpopulations. I mentioned that. And the recruitment of this fish is very stable and robust to large flow fluctuations. So, that's the Flint River. Everything's wonderful in the Flint River. Now we talk about the Chattahoochee. And if you want to know why are we worried about this fish in such a conservation way, you're going to find out. So the Chattahoochee is kind of like the redheaded stepchild of the ACF Basin. It's had some issues. So we have developed a range-wide management plan to try to figure out what's going on. Synthesis of everything we have learned, because basically almost until we started studying this fish, this is how much we knew about shoal bass. So you have to have it synthesized somewhere. We fit it into that framework of the native black bass plan that we talked about. It's specific to shoal bass. The native black bass plan is about everybody. This is just for shoal bass. It creates the plan for action. We had to specify management units. We're talking about that in a minute. Identify threats, issues within each management unit. Why is that important? Well, because it's a very diverse area. Restoration options, prioritize actions, leverage funding. I mean, we need to get organized because bad things are happening to these guys. So what are some of the challenges? Well, here's the thing. The ACF Basin is rather large. It's also very diverse. It's based just over 51,000 kilometers of area. It spans 5 degrees of latitude, which, to put that in layman's terms, it goes from the foothills of the Appalachians to the ocean. That's 1,300 meters of relief. Completely different geology north to south. I said it was pretty diverse. 122 fish species live there. 17 of them are introduced. That's pretty sweet. Probably more now, by the way. That changes every day. 30 mussel species there. 11 of them are listed. We have Atlanta in the north, extensive agriculture in the south, and everybody's got their finger high in that thing, including the Supreme Court. There's many data gaps that remain, including where the heck the fish is. And why is that? It's because this fish is very hard to sample using conventional gears. And then we always have this, and this is something that I don't think I fully appreciated until the last couple years. Much of the stream degradation, not only in the ACF, but all over the country, has happened so far into the misty past that I'm not even sure what these streams used to look like. So, the ACF Basin, Chattahoochee and the FLINT are the main things. I said they're very different. You can see what I'm talking about here. The drainage area might be pretty similar, but it stops there. 11 dams are in the Chattahoochee, and a whole lot of people. And that's just the people that live within the watershed, because there's 6 million people living in Atlanta, a lot of whom draw their water from the Hooch, even though they're not living in the Hooch Valley. The FLINT, on the other hand, is a lot more rural. Now, I mentioned scale might be an issue here. The ACF Basin, turns out, is larger than 9 of our states and Puerto Rico. It's 66% of the size of the state you're living in right now. So this is a really big area here. And it's very diverse. If you look at the upper part, the closest part to you right now is a very typical Appalachian river with these beautiful rhododendrons growing along the sides. It's quite lovely. Clear, super clear water. Then it meets Atlanta, and it turns into this, which is kind of like a glorified ditch with with a little bit of, sediment in there, to say the least. It's probably got more metal that you couldn't get through an airport carrying a bag of that. And then some rocks buried in the sediment somewhere. When you get down to the fall line, it changes character yet again to become this super wide, giant river with these huge bank-to-bank shoals. Of course, the 3 or 4 that aren't covered up by the 100 reservoirs that are in that area. And then, speaking of reservoirs, I was going to put in, just for a joke, the Chattahoochee from here down, but it would just be one giant reservoir, because that's what it is. So we'll just shift over to the FLINT and say that the lower FLINT is so totally different from all the rest of this, it's not even funny. It becomes a karst landscape with a high connection to an aquifer, super deep water, limestone shoals, no longer granite shoals, and very clear water. So to say the least, we got our work cut out for us here. Remember, I said I'd see this graph one more time. How can it go extinct? Species borrowing, again. And what do I mean by that? It is the simple thing that, well, we're collecting shoal bass in our samples, so we know what's going on. Ha, says I. This is some of the data from the Georgia DNR Heritage Program, basically. It's what they base their assessments on, okay? And so these individual little dots are collection sites. The greener it is, the more recent shoal bass have been collected there. The redder it is, the less recent it's been collected there. So that looks actually pretty good. You might know that Georgia DNR has a stream team, which a lot of states don't have. It's really cool. They've been doing this for a long time. It's a crew of people that go out and sample not all the streams in the state, because that's impossible, but a lot of them on a rotating basis. So they have all their data online. It's really good, really cool. They collected shoal bass 16 times in 7 different creeks in the ACF Basin over a 15-year period. So that's not too bad, except when you look at, that was out of 259 possible places that they could have gotten them in 169 creeks. And it looks even worse when you realize that they failed to even collect a single shoal bass in 11 streams where you today could go out and catch them on a hook and line. So what does one say when you have situations like that staring at you in the face? Because that, by the way, is what people base their opinion on as to whether or not the fish is going extinct. So once again, how can this fish go extinct with no one looking? When you think you're collecting them and you actually aren't. We've had a hard time convincing some of these folks of this. Shoal bass are not largemouths. They're not shadow bass. They're not suckers. They're not chubs. They're not darters. They are not shiners. They live in places like this. This is not an easy place to sample. Now, you can gang up on them, like some of them do here in Upper Chattahoochee. And that's always amusing, you know, to see how many backpack shockers can you actually fit in one line, and how many people can you con into carrying buckets and nets for the vain hope of seeing a shoal bass. But the fun is over when you go to places like this, because how the hell are you going to do that? Does anyone have 20 backpack shockers and 40 suckers? Probably not. So how do you sample this? Because that's where the fish is. This is how most assessments in stream communities are made. Shoal bass laugh at this. They mock you as they swim by. If you're lucky, you might see that. We've developed something to try to bridge the gap, something that gives our typical OSHA people a fit of the dry heaves, is our canoe electrofishing unit there. That while safety is a possibility of an issue here and there, it actually collects fish, which is a big bonus over just watching, you know, water and endless darters swim by while you're using a backpack shocker. So we've been trying to figure out this, by the way. I mean, this is amusing and all, but I mean, it's a real issue. If you cannot figure out whether the fish is going extinct or not if you can't catch it. So this is a backpack electrofisher. This is what we collected in the student thesis from the last one, not the current one. And he was trying to figure out where they were. Backpack electrofishing catches a fair amount of shoal bass with a decent catch rate. Unfortunately, they're all about 4 inches. The canoe shocker does not collect a ton of fish, and the catch rate's not much better, but at least it catches age 2 and 3 fish, but not a whole lot of the bigger ones either, because they're big, powerful fish, and it's hard to stun them with a field that's only that big around. So while this is an improvement, it isn't the answer. Well, what about boat shocking? That seems like it would be pretty cool. You know, of course, that's the habitat you have to run the boat in. But, you know, so we have some of that, though. The Upper Flint River, where I did that tagging stuff and all, that you can actually get standardized sampling. DNR does go out, do standardized sampling. This is some of the data we did in seasonally looking at these fish. So the first thing to look at here, and this is the thing that blew my mind, absolutely. Another one of those mind-blower moments for me. So note the mean total lengths here, which are here. So this is spring, summer, fall, winter. We started in the fall in that project. And so I was pumped. I mean, we got some nice shoal bass here. We went into December, which is what I'm calling winter. We got not a lot, we were getting fish up in that 4.5, 5 pound range. And I was like, oh, I can't wait for spring. Because everybody knows when you're fish shocking for bass, spring is when the giants come. And then we sampled spring, and I'm like, well, that was disappointing. Mean total length of 8 inches. What are that red line? The red line denotes where the 75% mark occurs. So everything to the left is what 75% of your sample is. Look at spring. 75% of our sample was under 8 inches. Pretty much of a letdown. And what I've realized now is, why can't you catch them with a boat shocker in the spring? Because they're all up in that wadeable water where you can't get them with a backpack shocker, you can't get them with a canoe shocker, you can't get them with a seine, and you can't get your boat in there unless you really just don't like your lower unit. And the sad thing is, this is the best sample we can get across the entire range of this creature. This is the best one we get, because it has the right mix of accessible habitat for the shocker, high density in population, generally shallow depths. But here's the sad thing. This is what the anglers catch out of this river every spring. So even under the absolute best conditions, we're not monitoring this fishery very well at all. It's sampling overconfidence syndrome, as I call it. You may think that your samples are great, but they're actually not. And by the way, in case you're wondering, this was actually a real ad in a Minnesota bathroom for a clothing person in Duluth. So if you ever want clothes, go to that guy. He's going to hook you up. Of course, why a person selling clothes would advertise over a urinal is another question. The other question is, why did I go out to get my car and get a camera? But it's for this. Things I do for you. But yeah, I mean, this is where the fish are in the spring. How are you going to sample that? That's yellow jacket shoals on the Flint River. The entire river drops 40 feet in a mile. Show of volunteers who want to take a boat through that in the spring when the fish are there. I've been through that thing in a kayak twice, and both times I thought I was going to die. So sampling for these fish and working on them be like pulling canoes over impassable rapids in a whitewater course in the middle of Columbus. That's normal. By the way, these people were all willing to do this somehow. Or sampling in the same whitewater course right as whitewater rafts are shooting in front of you. Or dragging boats through trackless wilderness to access shoals that you otherwise can't get to. Or sampling it with that. Or having the stream dry up on you while you're trying to get down it to track fish. Or coming around the corner and finding a really friendly, uncharted 10-foot waterfall you now have to transport all your shocking gear around on impassable banks. Or trapping all your crap halfway into a 1-mile shoal and setting up in order to sample there. Or my favorite, having to carry chainsaws with you everywhere you go and be very good at balancing. Once again, a fantastic OSHA moment there. Somehow you survive it, and after the tomfoolery of climbing trees with waders and trying to track fish in waterfalls, the only thing you can really do is just kind of lay down, get a beer, or a medic, one of the two. The point is, these fish are not easy to work on. I'll tell you, I've got a guy right now, and he was the guy in that first picture there, pulling the canoe over the whitewater course. He worked in Alaska and Wyoming and in Oregon, doing all kinds of crazy backpacking out into the hierarchies and out in the Rocky Mountains, doing all this really unbelievable stuff. And he came here and spent 3 weeks doing this and went, "This is the hardest stuff I have ever done in my entire life." I mean, it's not just a job, it's an adventure. We're hoping that maybe this, our newest toy, is going to finally bridge the gap. This is a raft electrofisher that is used out west to collect salmon and trout. We are still working on this. We're slowly but surely figuring this out. Turns out, when you want to build your own electrofishing raft, you really are on your own. So we're trying to figure out how in the world to get the cathodes, the freight distance from the booms, and all that kind of stuff. This was taken 2 days ago on the Tallapoosa River. We're almost there. But I will not be the one taking that through Yellow Jacket Shoals. That's why I hire people. Okay, so our last big issue is genetic hybridization. And that's something that's near and dear to the local area here. The Chattahoochee has become quite a fun place to sample bass if you want to just be completely perplexed as to what you're holding in your hand. These lovely little darlings are all come from parts of the Chattahoochee on a regular basis, and I've been working on bass now for about 25 years, and I regularly say, "What the hell is this?" So this is what happens when you have hybridization just run unchecked. How about that lovely creature? What could that fish be? I've shown that to audiences of anglers, and one guy said it kept him up on nightmares for a week. It is not a lovely critter, that's for sure. That is actually, for those who wonder, a genetically confirmed largemouth bass, spotted bass hybrid from one of our creeks in Alabama. So, spotted bass are pretty much the hose of the bass world, and so even largemouth bass are not safe from their attentions.
You didn't put it back, did you?
Oh, heck no. Just to add to our woes, this smallmouth bass is one of many now that you can catch in downtown Atlanta. apparently in an effort to boost tourism or something, some guy threw smallmouth bass in the middle of Atlanta just to add to our joys and wonders. So you can catch fish like this, which I don't know what the hell that is either, but it's got smallmouth bass in it somewhere. So basically, the Chattahoochee now has not 1, not 2, not 3, not even 5, 6 species of bass that live in it, and only 3 of them are native. It wins the Grand Hybridization Award. My personal favorite, one I collected down in the ditch below Atlanta, it has a little bit of everything for everyone. Red-eye bass, a little bit of shoal bass, a little bit of smallmouth, even a little bit of spotted bass. We don't know what the hell this fish really is yet, but we're going to find out soon once the genetics guys hook the supercomputer up to it to figure out how many species it actually has. My absolute favorite, though, is what I call the real Chattahoochee bass. You catch these all the time. The bass-shaped fish with no markings at all. Just this. That is Micropterus genericus, the real Chattahoochee bass. You collect them all the time. We have also documented 3 critical population losses in the Chattahoochee just since I started working. No relation, I'm sure. One is this very presciently titled talk I gave 10 years ago of the Little Uchee Creek population, the last stand of the Alabama shoal bass, a native species on the brink. I'm here to tell you, it's fallen off the brink. It's gone. We went out there earlier this spring for the 2nd time in a row and failed to even collect a single shoal bass from that population. It's history. Here's another one. This is in downtown Columbus, Georgia. This is an area between 2 dams. There was a sweet, small, but awesome shoal bass population in here that the DNR used to collect rootstock to stock the shoal bass population up in Atlanta. And when I say sweet, I mean sweet. I mean bass that you don't see anything of most anywhere else. This is not a typo. These are actually, in fact, 6 to 7.5 pound shoal bass out there. And that's part of the thing. Well, they're gone. These are 2 6.5 pound shoal bass we collected from that reach in 2009 in June. So they're post-spawn, and they were 6.5 pounds. There were some really big animals there. Gone. Cannot collect a shoal bass out of that pool today. Another one is in that area right near Auburn on the Chattahoochee. And I don't have actual data, but I'll tell you this. In 2010, I did a 1-year study there. We required us to go out and tag 40 shoal bass with radio tags and track them for almost a year. That's the paper that's in the Black Bass Symposium book. We did it in 2 days. Tagged those fish in 2 days. I can tell you right now, I fish out here, I've shopped out here. I could not do that study today. The population there has dwindled that bad that it would take us weeks to collect 40 individual fish if we even could. Now, the weird thing is that part of the Chattahoochee and that other part of the Chattahoochee, it hasn't changed in 120 years or more. And this is the stuff that have us scared and kind of scratching our heads like, what is going on here? If anything, the water quality is better there than it was in the 70s when, Atlanta was basically, its treatment program was a pipe, just directly out of whatever, So what to do? It's quite confusing. Not quite as confusing as this building, but close. Where do we go from here? Well, Texas was faced with a similar problem with its Guadalupe bass, and they solved it largely by stocking. They stocked over almost 2.5 million fish since 1992 in its streams to affect the swamp, the non-native smallmouth bass, and the hybrids there. But they have some advantages we don't have. These are 2 of those rivers that I've been on. This is actually as they're coming out of a drought. Texas is a dry place. And those streams almost dry up sometimes. And then they can go in there and really eliminate the fish. And also, note how big these streams are. Okay, so there's the Flint River. How many fish is it going to take to stock in the Flint River to swamp those fish? I'm pretty sure it's a lot more than 2.35 million. And I think it would have to be done in a lot less time. DNR does actually produce shoal bass. They're the only people on planet Earth that raise and stock shoal bass. But you can see that while they have ramped up production in the years, it's very unstable how well you're going to do. And they have stocked almost the same amount as Texas, although in 20 more years of stocking. But their mean annual is far below what we would need. And so the issue is one of production. And that's something that we have to solve along, the state knows that it has to ramp up its production in order to do this. Turns out, like everything else with this fish, shoal bass are not easy to raise. They hate ponds. Our research indicates that flow is important, of course. They do use gravel pans. They had been using domesticated stock. That is, that when they found fish that could handle the ponds, they kept them and used them again the next year, which is great for production. It's not so good for genetics. So to increase the genetics better, they, since 2009, been using strictly wild fish, which you have to go out and get them every single year. That's great for the hatchery because you don't have to house them anymore, you don't have to feed them, and you get better genetics, but you have to test these things because we don't have a source anymore where we could say, oh, these fish are all pure. They all have to be tested. And it sounds good, but what about the genetics between river systems or reaches? We have a lot of folks out there, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but there are some folks out there that are very concerned about, oh, we shouldn't stock flint fish in the Chattahoochee. Well, it sounds great, but if your choices are stock flint fish in the Chattahoochee or go into an endangered population and remove a bunch of them for hatchery, which is better? I don't know the answer to that question, by the way, but that's the stuff we're talking about right now. And it has real implications. 2 years ago, we went into the reach above the one on the Chattahoochee where the population's going down, removed about 20, I think it was 32 animals, took them to the hatchery after they got tested, threw some of them out, of course, but put them in the hatchery, and nothing happened. Zero. Didn't spawn at all. But half of them died. So we did all that for nothing, and we killed half the fish we took out of there. How many more times do we want to do that? Not too often. So, this is something we still have to come up with down the road. But as the great sage and eminent fisherman Mike Messina always said, problems are opportunities. And I can say, if we use that as a definition, there's a whole lot of opportunities still awaiting us here in the ACF Basin. So I'm from Philadelphia, or at least the area. That means that Independence Hall, Ben Franklin, and all that stuff's a big deal for us up there. Any of y'all ever been up there, you may have seen this chair, you may have heard this story, I don't know. This is the actual chair in Independence Hall that George Washington sat at when they were out there debating and creating the Constitution of this country. Ben Franklin was in the room. And Ben Franklin, as he's wont to do, was sitting with a very thoughtful look on his face near the end of all this when they were getting ready to vote on the Constitution. And one of the delegates said, "What are you thinking about over there?" Because he always knew it was going to be something good. And he said, "Well, I've been sitting here for days looking at that sun on that chair and trying to figure out whether it was a rising sun or a setting sun. Was this about to become something great, or was this just going to go down into darkness? And I will submit to you that this is where we are with shoal bass right now. What is in the future? Is it a rising sun? Is it a future that we can overcome these problems, or are we just going to sit there and watch and record as these populations go down? I would like to think that it's a rising sun, but some days I wonder. I really do. I just want to say y'all been great. This kind of work has been funded by all kinds of different people. All kinds of different angler groups have helped us out. The people behind the funding have been wonderful. It's been great to work with all these people, convincing folks to do really crazy, somewhat dangerous stuff in the name of science, but science must stumble on. And of course, we have to thank our main character, Mr. Shoal Bass, for being just so awesome. And with that, I will take any questions you might have. Thank you for having me.
2 minutes for questions.
Steve, these dramatic declines you showed in the Chattahoochee, these historical populations that used to exist, are there environmental drivers that correlate with that, with drought, is it hybridization? Are there key factors that folks are keying on to look at that? What are the hypotheses that are?
There are none, as of right now. We think the one in Little Uchi Creek, the small trib, was probably driven by that drought that it just never recovered from. The two that happened just recently in the Chattahoochee, man, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, it's so weird. The spotted bass has been in that system for 50, 60 years. The dams have been there for over 100. The water quality, like I mentioned, is better now than it was when whatever was going through there in the 70s. We just don't get it. And it happened so fast. I mean, a 10-year period. It went from being a fishable, shockable population to where you hardly get them anymore. I don't know what could have happened that fast. I'm wondering if it's fishing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
I'm wondering.
Exploitation.
I'm wondering if it's fishing, but man, if it is, then we need to redefine what's vulnerable fishing. Sir?
You said they tend to gather in shoals when they spawn. Maybe it was a localized event that has happened a couple of times around that same time period. Maybe it was a point source pollution event that ran into the river and decimated those populations, or it could have been overfishing of the spawning populations.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. But that part of the hooch there, so the one that the fish are not gone, but they've declined a lot, the only thing left there is a shoal, so they don't actually leave that shoal. Okay? So, and the other one doesn't even have a spawning shoal. We're not even sure where they ever spawned. We just know that they're there. Point source is certainly possible, but man, if it's the only problem is that I'm pretty sure anything of that magnitude we probably would have heard of in the last 10 years because we've been looking. If it happened prior to that, you could have dumped anything in the river and no one would have known. But yeah, I mean, obviously those are candidates, but it's weird is what it is. It's really weird. It is true that fishing is picked up a lot, but almost everybody throws them back. So, I mean, I'm wondering if it's like literally repeated catching of the same fish eventually kills them, I mean, they're tough. They are the toughest animals I've ever worked on. I mean, it's amazing. You put a tag in them and sew them up, and like 3 months later, they're healed and the scales have grown back over it. I've never seen anything like it. But I mean, anything can die if you catch it enough times. And these are weird populations, ones we don't study very much. They're isolated, low density, skewed toward adults. And you wonder if everything we think we know about effective fishing does not apply very well to those populations, and do we know anything about what, I mean, it's weird. They're weird, they are weird populations, because, I mean, the Flint's fine. I mean, the Flint is still rolling along, but, I mean, there's more bass in a mile of the Flint than there probably is in all that Chattahoochee area combined. I mean, so they are really some weird populations, but it's just so odd that they have persisted through all of the crap that they had to have gone through through the cotton farming era, through the mill era. I mean, I didn't go into all this, obviously, but those towns right there, those little dams were built for mills to power textile mills. And believe me, considering what the environmental regulations are like in Alabama today, I can only imagine what those mills were dumping in the water in 1905, So who knows? I mean, to go through all of that, to make it into the 2010s, and then just, it's like, okay, I'm done. I don't know. And that was before our election, so it couldn't have been that.
So obviously the fish can migrate to these spawning grounds, 200 kilometers, however far. I mean, if there are drought events, are they, obviously if they can be highly mobile, do you have any evidence from your tracking studies that they're using, some of like spring-fed streams or anything else as refugia? Like if it's point source, would they be able to avoid that, do you think?
Right.
Or is that just a question mark still?
We have not yet seen that. I thought Amy would see that, but none of her fish left the creek, even though it was super dry. Instead, they just all went and found the deeper spots and just sat there and waited it out until the water came back. And as soon as they did, they took off. I mean, some of them moved 20 kilometers in a day and a half. I don't know why. Like I say, we just got tired of running around in a circle and decided to go straight. But, and again, though, I mean, that little Uchi Creek, we think that's an issue there because, but drought's not going to be an issue in the Chattahoochee because even in a drought, all those dams still are generating power. So I mean, there's still plenty of water going through there all the time. I mean, that's the only good thing that the dams have going for you is they're still going to generate power no matter what the hell the drought situation is. So there was always water moving through there. So, it's weird. It's weird. I mean, I don't think we've ever had a serious group think yet to sit down and try to figure out what the hell's going on there. But I will say that we just stocked that one where they're gone this year, and we're going to start evaluating how well that went. But yeah, there's a lot. I tell my student Amy, I tell this all the time. There's nothing easy with this fish. I mean, every time we think we know something, then they turn around and kick us in the ass again and say sorry. So. But I guess that's part of the challenge. Job security.
Could it be like predation? Because if they're breeding right there in that shoal and there's 100,000 of them right there and largemouth bass, I'd say. Pretty bad.
There's very few largemouth bass in there with them. Spotted bass, perhaps. There's a lot more of them. But again, there hasn't been more spotted bass now than there was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So, something like that, which is, certainly valid. And we thought going into it that we would see some kind of direct competitive effects between a spotted bass and a shoal bass. We so far have not found any smoking gun of that. It looks like their main impact is genetics, not direct competition. But again, that's mostly drawn from the FLINT, which it's a natural system. And you get over on the Chattahoochee where everything's unnatural, the disturbance theory would suggest that because that's a highly disturbed system, you'll have different kinds of interactions and the introduced fish can do better. But it is just so weird because we can at least count for 5 or 6 decades that spotted bass have been in there with them. So, it's just one of those things. There's very few easy answers in our field, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, it's getting about that time. I'm sure we still have a lot of questions, mainly where can we go catch shoal bass sometime tomorrow morning. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up. If you have any more questions, we're headed to Nick's downtown. So I'd love to see everybody there. And please, let's give Dr. Sammons another round of